Okay, calling the Joint Committee on Ways and Means and Human Services and Health to order. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from several departments who are requesting additional funds for their biennial budget requests. We'll begin with Hawaii Health Systems Corporation. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Dela Cruz, Chair Sangwana Ventura, Vice Chair Kino, members of the joint committees. I'm Linda Rosen. I'm CEO for Hawaii Health Systems Corporation. And we appreciate the time to just give a little bit of general information about HHSC. We have a very large request here. I want to provide a quick background about it, since we're really a unique state agency. I'm not very many of representatives from all of our regions here also to answer questions when I'm done. The first slide is just it just shows our mission. This is what we do, how we measure ourselves. We have many quality measures that are applied by CMS and others as to our performance. And I think we are very cost effective. Next slide. I wanted to really quickly remind you of HHSC's history. Many of you probably recall back in the day, our rural communities had healthcare from the plantations. They provided all the healthcare. When the plantations closed down, the counties tried to sustain them, but they had a hard time. So in 1967, all of these various facilities were transferred to responsibility of the Department of Health. But the Department of Health was coming in for increasing budgets every year. And in 1994, a Blue Ribbon Panel was convened, which led to the creation of HHSC under 323F features. And that the original governance of HHSC was actually centralized. But over time, there was conflicts between the various islands and regions. And in 2007, there was an amendment of 323 to create the regional system of governance. Today, HHSC is governed by regional boards, and the regional boards have complete authority over their operations and their facilities, and planning how services are provided. The corporate office supports the regional initiatives, but we do not control regional operations at all. The next slide shows our HHSC regions. We have 5. You'll note that Maui region is now operated by Maui Health Systems, and they are operating that under a 30-year lease with the potential for 2 10-year extensions, and that occurred in 2017. We also have a few system affiliates, Kahuku Medical Center and Hawai'i Community Care. Now, the next slide is just a pie chart showing the relative size, if you will, operating expenses of our regions. You can see that most of our business, right, and is East Hawaii, West Hawaii is about 75% of HHSC services are on Hawaii Island, quite a bit on Kauai, and the smallest pie is for Oahu. Now, the next slide is about our request for funding. Well, I'm putting in with HTA 212, which now consists of the neighbor island regions only, East and West Hawaii and Kauai. For the last several years, the Oahu region is receiving a separate appropriation, and now it's under HTA 215, and NHS is also separate appropriation. I wanted to point out, because I'm actually proud of this, our corporate operations are only 2.5% of the total operating expenses, which is extremely low for the industry. And it's paid for actually by the regions based on their size. They split it up. Next slide. We have a lot of accomplishments in our longer written testimony. We've listed them, but I wanted you to know in terms of quality and all some of the things that we've achieved. Oh, back there, I guess it was just the number of folks we've taken care of, but I have already told you that we are really responsible for most of the acute health care on Hawaii Island, about 30% on Kauai. Now, this slide is also showing you that we've received some of the highest ratings available in the healthcare industry, 4 and 5 stars. The Medical Center is one of only 4 hospitals in the state that was rated, acute care hospitals that was rated 5 stars by CMS. And the last bullet emphasizes that we work very hard to get the revenues that we are due from all of our various payers. And so it's called, revenue cycle, billing, holders. It's a very intense aspect of our work. But we don't sit back and come here and just ask for money. We're really hard to cover our expenses ourselves. but we have a lot of challenges. And although we appreciate funding, it's difficult to plan when you don't know how much money you're going to have from year to year. And of course, I don't need to mention our aging facilities. We have small scale operations. And in healthcare, there's always changes. There's need for new technology and new services to keep up with things. And we're challenged because we don't have much of a reserve. Next, we also have a difficulty with workforce. I'm sure you've all heard about the healthcare workforce challenges, but imagine they are even greater at our smaller neighbor island facilities, not only because of the cost of living is so high in some of those communities, but we also don't have enough training programs to grow our workforce where they live. And so we end up using a lot of contract workers, which is extremely expensive. Next slide. We are proud of the fact we provide services to all patients, regardless of their, and of course, we have a state where we have a high rate of coverage. However, Medicaid, Medicare don't always cover the cost of providing our services. And everyone's aware that my generation is coming up needing a lot more healthcare services in the future. And unfortunately, and this may seem trite, but we can't increase our charges even though the costs keep going up because those are fixed by the government or by our contracts. Next slide. And then one of the biggest factors we have to do with our personnel costs, which are very, very high compared to the private sector. And that has to do with the fringe benefit rate, which is the payment, into the retiree health fund. And unlike the other departments, and this is very important, HHSC, that's okay. This is a difference between our person, go to the next one. So the personnel cost between HHSC on the left as a percentage of our operating expenses is over 80%. And for the industry, it's private industry, it's 55%. And so what happens is that we just basically have a hard time, one, increasing anything without, adding quite a bit of cost, because all services generally just require personnel and often very highly skilled personnel. So I think that the other thing I wanted to mention, and you may remember this, but in terms of collective bargaining and fringe benefit, the executive departments are automatically funded for these costs, and we are not. So when you see the collective bargaining bills with general fund for the departments, we have special fund, which means we have to come up with the money, and the same thing for the fringe benefit rate. So if these costs were not, basically imposed on us without funding, we wouldn't really need to come in and ask for so much funding. So the next slide is basically where we're at, and we're in an unusual situation, although, due to inflation and collective bargaining, we always need to come in for some money. It's exceptionally large this year because over the last several years, the increases, which we've appreciated, have been either non-recurring or federal funds. We got quite a bit of federal funds and ARPA funds, which was great, but now those are gone. If you follow from the left to the right, you would see that our base funding is less than what we received in 2019. And it's significantly less than what we received last year. Now, there's a slight error in that slide because they didn't add in 8 million, but it's still, I think, less than 100,000 is our base, right? Yeah, 100 million, I'm sorry, 100,000, 100 million. And the next slide actually is just a picture of that. You can see these, the recent years of funding we have received. The most recent for this fiscal year was great, but everything those increases are all non-recurring, and our base is below that first bar for 2019. So that's why we have, a portion of our request is just making up for that funding. And then the last slide, the next slide is just a quick representation. I wanted to show you, this is the East Hawaii region. The blue is our operating expenses, but the red section is what we have, we get in subsidy, right? So total operating expenses, but the red is what the subsidy is. So I wanted to show this to show you that we are generating a majority of the cost of our services, but we still need your help. And the next slide is just a sad picture of what would happen if we didn't get increased funding. I won't go through the detail, but what it really would mean, the next slide, is if we had these significant deficits, our regional boards would have to decide what services they would need to cut. And indeed, in fiscal year 2016, you may remember we did cut some services and we had a reduction in force. So we really hope that that's not the future here. And we hope that you would agree with us that the services we provide should be sustained and even grown. And we just really appreciate your consideration of our request, and we're all here to answer questions. Mahalo.
Thank you. Members, questions?
Yes. So thank you, Chair. I have a question regarding your capital improvement request,
Table,
HHSC.
table 15.
I don't know what this is,
Hey, Chair.
the highlights. 17.
Okay, wait, let me get it.
You got it?
Yeah, wait, I'll look for it.
Oh.
It will be. Each.
The rest of the.
It had 50 million toward the expansion of intensive care unit and medical surgical unit at Hilo Med Center, 12 million various HHC regions statewide.
134.
134.
Page 134.
Okay, page 134. Okay, so my question is regarding the Oahu region. I guess
No. We're gonna have Oahu after.
Okay,
So let's just do.
okay, let's just do, okay, never mind it. We'll do Oahu. I'll ask.
Yeah, so they'll come up.
Okay,
Other questions?
Any questions for HHSC?
enjoy.
Sorry, I didn't mean.
No, wait, yeah, we'll just have HHSC and then when you're done, then we'll call Oahu out.
Okay.
I just had a quick question on your starting cash balance. So what's that balance for the upcoming fiscal year?
Ed can give you that.
You're asking about fiscal year 2024?
Yeah.
So just on that slide that we did show, look at, I think it's page 18 or in the handout 19. Based on our budget for fiscal year 23, we're looking at starting fiscal year 24 with about $110 million in cash.
So that includes all the reimbursements.
Yes, that's about, I would say maybe about 50 something days cash on hand. So that
Okay.
means we could go maybe, we have enough cash to last maybe a month and a half or so, almost 2 months. But, with the deficit that we're facing, we're down to basically zero.
Okay, so your budget request is on top of the cash balance.
Yeah, so it would be allow us to fund that. You see that negative deficit on that slide, that 153 million, it will help us to fund that deficit.
Okay, wait, let me look it up. What page?
It's on page 19 of the PowerPoint.
We don't have the power.
No, right there.
It's on the front.
No, we have it. It's page, it starts with on 884. So it's the last page of the PowerPoint.
Second to the last slide.
Could be a slide label 19. Slide number.
Okay. Oh, so much. No, it's in there. Page what, Stacy?
860.
860. Okay. Okay, so you're
Yeah,
looking.
it's on the screen, right? It's on the wall right now.
Oh.
Oh.
It's 861. 861.
Okay.
Okay, so here, go here. 861. No. Just go in there.
Got it.
Yeah, that's right. 861. Yeah.
Okay.
So just to clarify, this would be the projected cash flow if the general fund appropriation level were to be the same after you backed out all the non-recurring items and the loss of the ARPA funds.
Wait, your starting cash balance is the 100K.
Yes. Well, we projected what we thought we would do for fiscal year 24 in terms of our revenues and our expenditures. And that comes down to that negative 153 million. Well, you can see on the general fund appropriation line, that $93 million number is after you take out all non-recurring items from the fiscal year 23 appropriation. So the ARPA fund amounts that we had in the past, that's backed out of that, that's excluded from that number.
So your part of your budget is to use the cash balance then, right?
Yes, we're projecting to utilize the cash balance.
And
we
then
had
as
carried
more
forward.
money comes in, you just keep adding that.
Well, yeah, well, so as money comes that we add in, that you have to pay for like payroll and other expenditures up to that. So that's basically what it's showing.
Okay. So how much do you normally get in reimbursements?
If you look at that top number on the cash collection operations, we're looking at about 539 million across the system
In reimbursements?
for 1 year, yeah.
And then you're saying your total operations is that, so that's why you need the 219.
We need we're looking at the 153 million. It's in the pink. Yeah, our expenses are we generate about 539 million in revenue every year. We're collecting cash. We pay out about 759 million in terms of operating expenditures.
Yeah.
So that's basically your payroll,
Yeah,
your drug supplies, medical supplies, those kind of things.
yeah.
And then we have some other non-cash flow items such as like capital expenditures, debt payments, those kind of things. Then we have the corporate allocation from Maui, and then the general fund appropriation line. We use the number that was after all the reductions that for non-recurring items from fiscal year 23. And then after you factor in all those funding sources, we come down to what our projected capital deficit is, which is about 153 million. So our funding request that we have for this year would be to try to fund that deficit. So we don't have to have cash go down to 10 days cash on hand.
And the other factor you'll see in your testimony is the anticipate increased revenues from Medicaid because of the or within compensating care funds right now. Public health emergency on the public health. Some Medicaid for that. But it also means that we will be less funding from that source.
So right now, your only strategy to generate revenue is going to be the reimbursements.
We just recently renegotiated our HMSA contract. We worked very hard on that, all the regions, and I think we did pretty well. But there's only so much that you can do in that regard. Our payments are fixed and we don't have an opportunity. And of course, by law, we can't charge, those who have Medicare or Medicaid, anything extra.
And also, since most of our reimbursements come from the Medicare and Medicaid program, those reimbursements, we can't do anything about those.
Yeah. But what about, like, I know in Hilo, you have additional land assets or space, because you have that old building that.
You talking about the old hospital building?
Yeah.
That's correct. The old hospital building is now the where the Yukio Okutsu Veterans Home sits. So they're occupying that building. So that old hospital is no longer.
What do you have space for additional things?
Yeah.
And you want to come up?
Well, you don't have to. I mean, the whole point is, if you guys can take an inventory of land assets that you have, then we could start leasing.
So the Hilo Medical Center,
Come up there.
chairs, and I remember when you came over with the Senate group that you asked that same question. Most of our campus is ceded land. So we have about a 26-acre campus, and then we have a 10-acre plot that's DNLR land, but pretty much all of it is either ceded or it's owned by another agency. And
So the DNR land is ceded too.
I don't know if it is. It's just under DNLR.
It's not. I don't think it's.
I don't think it's seated, no.
Yeah, I mean, I would think at some point you're gonna have to come up with some other strategy. Yeah, to create revenue, because if the reimbursements are not enough, general fund, 153 million. You know, you gotta at least try to generate some revenues.
We really, with respect, there isn't, we provide hospital clinic services. And they either are reimbursed, you know, by these payers or not, and we don't have control. We can't charge
No,
more.
no,
I'm
I
not
get
really
that.
sure. in
I'm
healthcare.
not saying that should, that's fine. But that's one tool that you should have and that you do use.
Right.
But Kamehameha schools, for instance, their mission is to educate.
Right.
But they spend a lot of effort also in generating revenue so they can, you know, implement their mission.
If we had an endowment, we would work hard to.
So why
to
don't you guys,
generate
but why
revenue.
don't you produce, why don't you guys submit?
You mean you would
legislation?
like us to do a different business besides health?
You have to figure out a way so that you can generate revenue to pay, to subsidize operations. Other than just the general fund.
Well, unless we do something besides provide hospital services. and
Well, that's the
clinic
same thing we
services.
did with education. That's why we created SFA. School Facilities Authority. So that at some point that will be an arm of DOE to go generate revenue off of its assets.
Well, certainly we could look into that, Senator. We'll do our best.
No, I know, but you still gotta try. I mean, I don't mind.
No, no,
I see what you need and we have to
But
provide some
if you
funding.
hear what the chair is saying, though, you're into this year asking for some pretty large sums for CIP. If that's gonna be tax exempt bonds, then you won't be able to monetize
Yeah.
those buildings. So he wants a plan. So in some ways, before we consider these large outlays, where we build buildings that we can't use to, you know, to provide additional revenues for you, then we want to wait on that CIP.
Well, I know that for a number of the requests, it's really the safety of the community and the services we receive that we have to address. We have life safety issues in some of our hospitals, and we have to go through a lot of accreditation on all of
Yeah,
that.
I'm
and
not
if we-
disputing all of that. All I'm saying is you have to look at another way that you can generate
No, I'm just
revenue.
speaking of our CIP requests, that's all. But
But if the CIP request added, if we did taxable bonds, if you added additional floors, you could lease the additional floors to doctors.
Well, we'll certainly, you know, look into those ideas. Thank you.
I have a question. On table 15 then, for the lump sum, the $12 million and $15.5 million lump sum, that's for both West Hawaii and Kauai.
Yes, I mean, you're talking about the governor's recommendation.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, so that is for East Hawaii, West Hawaii, and Kauai region. This is for-
oh, it includes some East Hawaii as well.
In the lump sum, yeah. That's what the governor, Iggy had put into his budget proposal.
Okay. Were there any other projects that were not included that were requested from the Iggy administration?
Yes, there was a large list of requests that we put in. That was a line item by line item for specific projects. And we actually put that in under Governor Green requested administration budget too.
So
So
that's on appeal right now, or
Yeah,
have you
correct.
gotten any kind of decisions?
not yet. We haven't heard anything back from them yet.
Well, to the extent they allow you to share that information, could you share that with us and what the
Oh,
requests were? And if you could break down the lump sums for us, that would be good.
Yeah, we have that we just prepared that recently, so we're gonna get that out to the committee.
Yeah, I can see general funds being part of your strategy. That shouldn't be your only strategy. I mean, you look at Queens Hospital, right? They have a bunch of strategies, but you know, the trust owns International Marketplace that generates revenue to help subsidize Queens. So if you even came, it's cheaper for us to go help buy an asset for you if you're gonna generate revenue over long term versus us giving you general fund every year. I don't know if these thoughts are like registering or not.
Well, for course, development and other types of business, it's not the business that we are in. So if that's something you want us to diversify out of healthcare or something like that, then I think that's something we could look at, but it's not our area of expertise.
No, that's the same thing SFA said with DOE. So there is an example that we're trying to do that.
And I think the lands that we have are actually fairly limited. I don't know.
That's fine. Then you come in for us to go purchase another asset that you can generate revenue off of.
In some areas, you may have lands, like Big Island probably has the most lands in the corporation. And so, making use of that to create the
Yeah, but-
new,
Even if you don't
asset.
have it in your inventory. I mean, you guys should just be thinking outside the box where, hey, this, for instance, Little Kalani Trust, they just sold a couple assets in Waikiki. Shoot, go buy that, and then now you have that revenue for future to help offset your costs. Instead of us giving you cash every year.
No, I understand what you're saying, Chair.
I'm not,
Yeah.
you don't even have to go develop it. Go find something already developed that you just got a lease.
Mhm.
Yeah, we will need to, obviously we will need to have, the resources to get people to have the expertise that will look into this kind of problem.
And create a commercial center. You can create a commercial center within the properties.
Well, do an MOA with
Generate.
another agency that does that. There's DBED, just do an MOA. We can try to get a study going. But I would like to see some effort in trying and attempting to generate revenue.
So, thank you, Chair. If I may add to that, I think one of my concerns, and I brought this out with Mr. Brinkman, was the centralization of like Hilo Medical Center, okay? So one potential revenue generation would probably leasing out your own operating, operating rooms to private surgeons. And what I'm trying to say is when Pacific Surgical Center is getting squeezed out because HHSC Hilo has hired their own operating surgeons using their own operating rooms. So we're using public monies to squeeze out private business, which isn't what government's supposed to do. And if you're coming to us, asking us for monies, operating monies to help squeeze out private business, that's not good either. So, not only to generate, but maybe to cut costs by not squeezing out private business. Rent out your surgical rooms. Don't squeeze out a surgical center that's already operating by hiring your own your own surgeons. That's my complaint.
Any other questions? Okay, if we can get Oahu. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair,
Good afternoon.
Chairs, Vice Chairs. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Sean Sonata. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Oahu region. I'm here also in my capacity as the designated legislative liaison. So if I can just start real quick with the introduction to the Oahu region and what we've been doing recently. I can say that our board and our executive management team has been working really hard over the past couple of years with many issues. I know one thing that all of you are concerned with is that transition to the Department of Health. But that was one of the major projects that we were working on. But I can say, just referencing your concerns earlier regarding monetization of the property, we did develop a strategic plan for the Oahu region and the campuses, and really it focused on two separate areas because our business operation is.
Wait, though, so your
Yes.
strategic plan was to shift to long-term care facilities in DOH? That's all part of your strategic plan?
That was a direction we're moving in, and part and parcel of that was our original strategic plan that would work in tandem with the transition. So if the transition happened, then we would still try and follow up with, as I explained, the items in our strategic plan. If it didn't work out, then we could still focus on, we would have something to fall back on.
Is it working out?
In certain respects, it is. In other respects, we have difficulties and a lot of work to do, but we have been working with the Department of Health on.
What's the vision of why even think about moving those facilities to DOH?
The original idea behind moving the facilities to the Department of Health was that we view the Walker Region's long-term care operations as a pure safety net operation. Our revenues are fixed. We service about 75 to 80% of Medicaid residents, and these are all the people that the other private facilities won't take. And so if you look at our balance sheet at the end of any given year, it's primarily our Medicaid reimbursements, and then you counter that with the cost of labor, which far exceeds the reimbursement rate that we get for Medicaid, and it's always a loss. So we kind of characterize ourselves more as a safety net and more towards a social service than a corporate business type of operation. And then when we worked with the Department of Health, their focus was on increasing mental health services, possibly homelessness if it was feasible. And the idea was that if we became—
what's the cost of moving into DOH? You would need to rehabilitate those two facilities. They're fairly old. They probably are not appropriate for the kinds of services that you're talking about. Is there a figure that we need to rehabilitate those two facilities?
Vice Chair, it took a lot of analysis to see what was feasible. So one project that we—
So I want to know.
Right,
what the
right. So,
analysis was.
one project that we already implemented as a pilot in the first place is called Polycana. We provided and set up space that was very low investment in one of our units that we had closed for that particular purpose. And then we contracted with the Department of Health to provide all the CAM services, support services.
Can you scale that then?
I can't. It can be done, but again, as a region and having this important Leahi campus under our control right now, we're trying to really find out what is the best approach from a financial standpoint versus a public benefit standpoint. The Polycana program so far has been great. It started with 6 beds and then rose to 20-something beds. And then I think you can follow up with MHD when they come in here later. That plan and that program resulted, if you go a comparison of the people occupying the bed space there and the cost for each person, and then at the Hawaii State Hospital or related facilities, these are where they come from. The cost difference in one given year is about 15 million. So it's not going to be reflected in our balance sheet, but it is a cost savings that is realized by the Department of Health. And it all comes from the same pool of money, right? It's the state general fund that is benefiting from this. Right. So, I mean, that's just one project that was in place, and there is potential for expansion of that program. But then again, the space that is usable, if we use it for that program, it would be minimum investment, high return in terms of savings. But there's an importance or a priority right now in the community for mental health, behavioral health treatment. And so then that's where the balancing act comes into play, because that's going to require a lot of infrastructure investment like you referred to. And it's also going to require a very detailed plan, because we're not going to ask you for money until we have a detailed plan and we have the credibility to make that request. I can say we do have a meeting scheduled already next week with the new homelessness coordinator, James Kushiba, as well as the I forgot the other individual's name, but on housing. And so right now I can, say hand in hand that we're not in a place where we have a definite plan, because we were, prioritizing our time and focusing a lot on the transition itself. But for the reason we stated earlier, and the Department of Health will elaborate on later today, the cost didn't justify the actual benefit in the end. And so if, I think everyone has read in the article about this whole transition, not everything is accurate in the article, but the high cost, if it's invested in—
Wasn't accurate? Really? That's kind of a—
Yeah.
Yeah, it was everything I read there.
So just to summarize and answer your question, I think it's a process. We're not just twiddling our thumbs doing nothing. We have been trying to do what we can with the resources we have. If I can just point out a couple of things that we have done.
But are you saying that in your strategic plan then,
Yes.
providing long-term care beds is not a key part of your mission?
It is a key part of what we're trying to preserve. So our strategic plan focuses on, because there is a high need. I mean, we anticipate—
And then you think that's better off if they're under DOH then?
Well, the plan was really to
'Cause,
use it.
remember, when we formed
Right.
HSSC,
Mhm.
it was with the idea that you could be public, quasi-private, where you would be able to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more nimble. And now you're proposing to put an important part of your mission back into DOH.
I mean, you're correct, but we like to believe that our operations are not really have less of a similarity to a corporate type operation or a big public hospital or private hospital situation because of the services we provide are important, long-term care, and there's a high need on Oahu. That's why those are the only facilities operated by HHSC on Oahu. But under the DOH, in our conversations with the leadership at the time, we were under the impression that we could preserve, it'd actually do well to preserve the existing long-term care operations by being part of the executive branch. Just for instance, Dr. Rosa mentioned earlier about funding, how the staff positions are automatically funded, the increases are automatically funded, and then all we would be requesting in that environment would be, maybe increases in other overhead type, situations. But to us, we believe that would give us some comfort in knowing that our long-term care staffing levels, would be funded. But the trade-off for that and the benefit to the Department of Health would be they have more access to all of this property that can be repurposed without having to contract with us for every single new project that occurs. I mean, it seems simple at the time, but having brought in a consultant and worked on this for over a year, it proved itself to be too cost intensive, and the benefits that were to be realized just weren't worth the 10 million up front and then another 5-6 million just to support it with no added benefits.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I have a question. I mean, you've been working on this for almost 2 years, or you say over a year. And in the process, you were looking at both DOH and HHSC as being the responsible. Did you, in all of your work together, find out what can you do? Because you're saying that your costs are 83% versus 55% in other similar structures across the country. What can you do? And are we putting money behind you in things that you can't do? And I think we need to clarify that. What does HHSC do? And if you're dealing with all these Medicaid patients, then it's a public hospital. So have you identified that? And can you provide any information on some lessons learned from your work with DOH? Should it be DOH? Should it be you? But we need long-term care beds and we need mental health stabilization beds. So who's going to do it?
Right.
And who can do it most cost effectively?
To start, as to the remainder of the system, I can say that they all have important roles in their respective communities, but I am not the experts on each individual region. But for the Oahu region, I can say that yes, it all started with the realization that we need long-term care beds on Oahu in particular, especially in the realm of Medicaid. And so that need is going to increase over time. But we started with the realization that it's a service that we have to provide, as a government entity, and it's a money loser because if it wasn't, all of the other private facilities would all still be in business and they would still be taking Medicaid residents, but they don't. So our focal point has been on realizing the value of that, but also recognizing that there are other important priorities in the community in the area of behavioral health, et cetera. And in terms of resources, we have one facility at Malahia, which is fully dedicated to long-term care. But then we have Leahi, which a portion of the campus is dedicated to long-term care, and the remainder of the campus has a lot of potential. But when I say potential, it's potential that needs to be overhauled because the structures are very, very old. And if we're going to purpose them for something new and innovative, it's going to require a lot of investment. And in order to get to that point, we have to collaborate with the proper parties so that we can first come up with the plan. What types of services are we going to provide? How we're going to provide them? And then what money we need. It's only when we have that in place that we would be able to come with our head up high. And
Don't you have that already? I mean, you've been planning this for over 2 years, I think. And don't you have a plan as to who should do what and how much it's going to cost, and at least a plan going forward instead of
When is it going to come out?
To be honest, we're in our genesis stage right now because the efforts that we're going.
Well, how long do you need? Because at some point we need
Of course.
we can't keep having these conversations year after year.
Right. And we don't want to keep coming up with excuses either. We want to, right. We do.
Still not ready to come up and say something about it?
I can say that
I mean, you sound like public safety. I mean, they're asking for $25 million more in planning for one site.
But as you can see in our budget request, we're not asking for a cent for anything in that realm. We're just asking for our baseline to continue our long-term care operations for now. Our CIP funding that we're requesting, is really to to do renovations and upgrade our sewer system, for example, things that will just keep us operational without us being able to fail as a facility in both locations. The money that we will anticipate asking for will come after the plan. And I know, Chair, you asked what is our specific timeline for that. I can't give you a specific timeline, but I can tell you that we have a new administration in place with the Department of Health. Luckily, one of the deputy directors has stayed on under the Green administration. And, the focal point I know and the priority, especially in this room and in this building, has been on behavioral health. And, we have to start kind of fresh. We have a new homelessness director. And
So Chair, I'd like to ask some questions.
Yeah, can you just following up on that though, how can Leahi Hospital be better utilized for the mental health facilities?
so the easiest, most cost-efficient way would be an expansion of the Polycana program. And that's been in discussions because it would be minimal investment in the existing space for their needs. On the other hand, when you look at behavioral health, there's different levels of care that are necessary. At the highest end, you're going to have to do anti-ligature in every single room. Prior estimates were that it would cost like $100 to $150,000 per room in order to satisfy that need. And if we're talking about 20 rooms, that's quite a bit of money just to house 20 people and be able to house 20 people, not to count the labor costs, training and even recruitment. We have workforce issues right now. So if we were to expand the existing Polycana program, if that becomes feasible, then we would be able to bring in people really quickly. But again, that's all forensic related. And we're under the impression that there's also a community priority for people that are non-forensic. And we would like to address that, but right now we're not experts at that. That's why we're talking to the experts on that. And if we can use the land and the property to do it, when we will, we're not holding back. We of course are prioritizing first and foremost our long-term care operations. That's what we've been all about for how many years. And everything else would be whatever we can do to help.
So, yeah, so to follow up on that, you made a request of $3 million in general funds for HHSC. That $3 million is the renovation. Is any of it for the Polycana project? I mean, to help expand that.
It is not, but if we were to expand that, the investment would be minimal that we might be able to shoulder them on our own.
Okay, and I understand that there are different levels of care for behavioral health, okay? But not going to the extreme, because I think my understanding of the transition was it wasn't gonna be for forensic. Forensic we're gonna keep at Kaneohe, but it was gonna be for non-forensic, for homeless stabilization bed. So we're not looking at the anti-ligature, we're talking about some, upon discharge, some stabilization to keep them off the streets until we can find them bridge housing and to move them forward. So I remember the discussion was that the reason for the Department of Health was for some reason you folks were not getting the contracts from Department of Health to do this expansion. And we had all this empty space in Leahi, right? So why haven't you folks been able to expand? And reading what was in the newspaper, I mean, you guys are, Department of Health is saying, well, it's cheaper to expand. Well, why haven't there been an expansion? I mean, why are we at this point now where you had to do the study?
I can say initially when Act 212 was passed, the first goal was to do the transition, right? And that alone doesn't just happen. And the whole reason why we're at this point where we are right now and the costs are so high is because through those efforts, which were very, very time consuming.
So none of the money you're requesting is towards the Act 212 expansion?
They are not, no.
So you right now, even though it's in the books regarding the transition, there is no funding request for that transition.
The Act 212, the Act 212 was to transition the Oahu region and our facilities into the Department of Health. After the transition was completed and, we're all set up with our different departments and we're under DHERD, et cetera, and all within the executive branch. That's when the projects would have been.
Would you ask for money? So right now there's no money for the transition, despite the legislature passing this bill allowing you folks to transition. And I just wanted to point out one other thing. The reason we were looking at, my understanding, the transition was there was some overlap with long-term care and adult. and behavioral health, in that with your long-term care, you folks were taking care of dementia and Alzheimer's patients. So we were hoping to, I guess, capitalize on that workforce to expand that to at least some non-forensic care. So I just want to point that out. Okay.
I can address that though. That is part of what we have been working on currently, and we have been doing as well. We have been admitting people with behavioral backgrounds into our regular long-term care facility because they meet the criteria for long-term care. And as long as they can be appropriately placed in the proper room and we're not mixing them where personalities clash, etc., we have been admitting them and we will continue to do so. We're even looking at right now potentially being able to designate a particular area for it. But again, in order to do that, we have to do it artfully, make sure that we have the right staff for it and that are properly trained. But with the existing staff and our existing capabilities, we have been doing that to the extent possible.
Thank you.
But if you when you transfer over to DOH, how are you gonna have the flexibility with the exemption of procurement?
That was a issue for us as Act 212 was going through.
Because that's what the vice chair talked about earlier, is the flexibility HHSC has, but DOH doesn't.
So the original draft of the bill carried forward the procurement exemption. As it went through the different committees, it kind of got watered down a little bit. And at the end of the day, when it finally passed, it was a temporary exemption during the transition process. But after that, it would die. And so, I mean, that's what we had to settle with. We can't, you know, propose a bill and ensure that everything will be in at the end, but we did our best.
But if you don't have that type of flexibility, are you still going to be able to accomplish a lot of the things that you're talking about?
Given discussions that we had, we knew that we'd have to make a lot of compromises because it's not just us, the administration for the Walker region, it's us working in tandem with the Department of Health and their leadership. A new director or deputy director would have to be appointed to oversee that as well. And it was all a to be determined situation because we didn't know who that person would be or how we'd approach that. But we did know with the existing leadership in the Department of Health that it would be challenging and we'd have to make compromises because of the loss of the exemption. But that also lends itself to our final decision at the end, which was that we agreed with the Department of Health that it'd be better if we operate in our current fashion with certain adjustments, but at the same time, we maintain our procurement exemption and we asked when we're ready for the money that would have been used for the transition to go into infrastructure and programming. And that's what we figured. If you want to have the greatest impact in the shortest amount of time, that's the correct route to do it because it would already take 2 years just to get all of our personnel under the Department of Health in the first place.
You guys got to come up with something clean, fast. So we're in this limbo to it all.
Agree.
I mean, just repeal if not. Are you guys?
There is a bill that the under Governor Ige's package proposes to repeal this session.
Any other questions for Oahu? Okay, we're gonna just recess for some minutes so we can have DOH come up.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna continue the joint committee. And now we hear from Department of Health. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Aloha kako.
Aloha.
Chair Dela Cruz, Vice Chair Keith Agaran, Chair Senator Ventura, Vice Chair Aquino, members of the Ways and Means and Health and Human Services Committee. My name is Kenny Fink. I'm the governor's nominee to be the Director of Health. I'm joined here today with First Deputy Susan Fernandez, Behavioral Health Administration Deputy Marion Suji, Environmental Health Deputy Happy Ho, and the Health Resources Administration Deputy position is not yet filled. Okay, so this is our leadership team. I also appreciate having our division and branch chiefs and other leadership team that are here to respond to any questions in further detail that might be necessary. The Department of Health's mission is to protect and promote the physical, psychological, and environmental health of the public. We do that following the CDC's framework of assessment, policy development, and assurance. Respectfully, I'd like to begin with some of the achievements and highlights over 2022. As you're aware, that COVID response was a big lift for the department to work through that. Other things that may have gotten less attention include their work to protect the public from monkeypox, Legionella, and the Sudan Ebola virus. We've continued to do efforts to increase colorectal cancer screening rates and reduce adolescent vaping. We submitted reports to the legislature, including the dual use of cannabis task force report. Regarding EMS, we had the successful transfer of the EMS responsibilities to the city county of Honolulu, where we've contracted with the county and then they go and provide those services. And that seems to be going well. We also transferred the radio network infrastructure to Hawai'i. That, to my knowledge, has gone successfully as well. Regarding mental health, we implemented 988. This is a crisis number that's national. Calls are routed by the area code of the phone you're calling from. So if people from Hawaii are calling who do not have an 808 area code, their calls will be routed to the area code of their number and have to be redirected locally to support. So just as a public service announcement, calling 988 will be routed nationally based on the area code of the phone. We've improved our crisis mobile outreach response time. It's less than 45 minutes. We opened the new state hospital and we implemented Act 26 and completed 160 evaluations. We've also been very active with Red Hill and implemented our order to basically stop and close Red Hill. We began wastewater surveillance testing. We submitted our final report to the legislature on cesspool conversion, and we've expanded some vital record services to the neighbor islands. So those are just some of the highlights to exemplify the breadth of scope of services that we provide to our community. Just to go in a little more detail with COVID, Red Hill, and mental health. So for COVID, just as an update, that new variant XBB 1.5 has been identified in 3 counties in our state. What we're seeing is recently is actually a decrease in cases and a decrease in percent positivity rate. But now with the XBB 1.5, we're tracking to see if those change direction. With this becoming the more common strain, it would seem to have some advantage of potentially being more infectious. There's not evidence yet that it causes more severe illness, but we're still waiting to get more information about this variant. It is still extremely important and recommended that people who have not yet received the bivalent vaccine do so, particularly those who may be at higher risk of complications. So we're still strongly recommending the receipt of the bivalent vaccine. Regarding Red Hill, the Department of Health has chosen not to be a party of the 2023 Administrative Order of Consent. That's between the Department of Defense and the EPA. We felt it was important that we maintain our authority to enforce our order to ensure that the people of Hawaii and our natural resources are protected. So we will continue to advocate and ensure that we do what we think is in our best interest with regard to that. The staff we have are working very hard on this to ensure that we're providing our oversight and monitoring the situation. With the positions that we have, we're not requesting any additional resources. We just hope we're able to fill some of those positions. So again, we're not asking for additional resources as we continue to do this. Should we need to pursue enforcement action, however, we would defer to the AG's office if they might need additional resources to implement any enforcement actions. Following Senate President Kochi's remarks regarding the visitors about being good guests, we would have the same expectation for the Department of Defense. We hope that they will respect and treat our environment, particularly within the context of future upcoming lease renewals. We hope that they will demonstrate that they are good guests. With behavioral health. As was mentioned earlier in the HHSC testimony, and I don't have all the history. I'm trying to get us informed as quickly as possible. I understand in Act 212 is the transfer of the Oahu region to the Department of Health. And that is on the books. To my knowledge, funding has not been requested to enact that transfer. While there was a report that looked at the cost of the transfer and created pause, we completely support the intent of the transfer to increase access to stabilization beds. And we're committed to doing that. We need to develop and communicate an effective plan to do that and ask for the resources that will be necessary, expecting that there's a need for CIP funds to get whatever facility we utilize to be able to provide those services. So again, to reiterate, we agree with the need to create these beds. We agree with optimizing use of existing facilities, and we need to communicate the most efficient plan and some options on how to best do that. As we look at that transition, there are just other considerations to be aware of. Regarding hospital census and waitlist issue, if there's a need to maintain access to skilled nursing facility or intermediate care facility beds, then that operation needs to be continued. So we would not necessarily want to decrease the access to that. We're looking at just expanding new beds and as we heard earlier, not decreasing the supply of those long-term care beds. Should also just be aware as you go through this process of how we optimize receipt of federal funding, such as through Medicaid, and the different rules between reimbursement for long-term care versus care provided in a institute for mental disease. So it's different federal regulations. So we just want to consider all the impact as we go through this process. Some options that we can do, as mentioned, we currently do lease space at Leahi, and that arrangement potentially can be expanded to lease additional space. Looking more broadly at the Oahu region, is there an opportunity to maybe leverage Leahi, Maluhia completely for this and separate the facilities and the roles that they provide? If we look at it, that there's a need for a population that has behavioral health needs and also long-term care needs, rather than looking at them as behavioral health patients who are getting long-term care services, we look at them as long-term care patients who just need additional behavioral health support. And again, there might be different implications about where they can be placed and how we can leverage funding. So I think there are a number of considerations that we hope we can go through quickly. Okay, this is an acute problem, and I think we need to come up with this a solution quickly. And understanding the timeline for CIP, we should start that process on the sooner side, knowing that there's a lead time to getting change in place. So we look forward to working with our HHSC colleagues in the legislature on how to develop a plan and pursue implementation of that plan. Okay. Before you is the budget that was submitted by Governor Ige. It's primarily base operations, but there are some new additions that I'd just like to highlight. We are working with the governor's office on recommendations or requests to be included in the governor's message, but I'll focus on what's before you today. Now, when we look at public health, oftentimes our success is the absence of something. So when we look at what is the appropriate staffing, at times that's difficult. And that is our responsibility to communicate what is the risk with the levels of inspections or other assurance work that we do. So I just want to reiterate that unlike some other areas where the more staff, the more you do, the more staff we have, the less you may see that there's a need for them. So just want to be cognizant of that. The greatest resource is our people. Our people are the ones that do this work. I really want to just recognize throughout the COVID pandemic, it was all hands on deck and they sprinted a marathon. And I appreciate all that they've done. I know folks are tired. I know there's burnout. And I appreciate that they've continued to do their work. In addition to the COVID response, they managed to maintain core operations and again, the breadth of the areas that we do. We have 3,300 positions, of which 750 are vacant. That's about a 25% vacancy rate. Reasons for vacancies are multifactorial, as you know, and I'm sure as other departments have testified. They're likely not unique to our department. They include just the available workforce, state salaries, teleworking policy, potentially the hiring process itself. And again, something that may be more unique, but not necessarily to the department, is just the burnout. And as folks are coming out on the other end of COVID, is an opportunity to say, I survived. It's time for me to move on to my next chapter. So we're just aware of that and the need to replace positions as quickly as possible. I've been working on assessing the impact of our vacancies. So for example, in HTH 430, which is for the Hawaii State Hospital, in the latest vacancy report, there are 146 vacancies. Those are services and functions have had to maintain. We've needed to do that through contracted staff and overtime. You'll see in 2022, overtime was about 15% of base budget, or $6.8 million. And additionally, we spent about $6 million on contracted staff for nurses and psychiatric technicians, and about an additional $5 million on locum tenens providers, such as psychiatrists and other medical providers. When we're unable to employ those providers, it often ends up costing us more through contracts than it would be if we just increased how much we would pay these provider types if they were employees. We are working to increase the salaries that we can offer to psychiatrists and psychologists. Creating a workforce pipeline is important. We partnered with the Windward Community College, Windward Community College, and have hired the first graduates in their new mental health technician certificate program. So I think that's a success. It's a step in the right direction. It's not enough. We need to continue to find ways to increase the workforce to meet our needs. One other impact of the workforce shortage is in the state hospital. There's still a unit we've not been able to open due to staffing. In other areas, we're not able to necessarily contract or otherwise get available staff. There's been a decrease in our desired level of service. So for example, vacancies have reduced our frequency of food and drug inspections, our ability to provide flu shots at schools, and not having certain positions has limited our ability to perform regulatory oversight, such as with regard to hemp sales. Our vacancies are not just direct service providers, they're also administrative staff. Much of our work is contracted. So there's a significant impact to those administrative positions being vacant as well, where it decreases our ability and timeliness to contract for the provision of those services. We've actively sought to establish and recruit positions. We've utilized some 89-day hires where we were able, and we've tried to fund positions that have 6 months of funding, but that's been somewhat of a limitation where we don't have funding for the additional 6 months to hire people. The budget before you includes full year funding requests for about 50 positions to help with recruitment and retention of those key positions. In addition, there's a request for a restoration of 5 public health nurses and their salaries that were eliminated in 2020. 3 of them are on Kauai and 2 on Windward side. The budget before you also includes a request for 31 new positions, of which 23 are for Neighbor Island District Health Offices. The district health offices have not received additional resources since 2011, and the demands on them have just continued to increase. And just to highlight 2 other positions are for the Environmental Planning Office, which when established would include scientists working on climate change health impacts on Hawaii. While we continue to try and reduce climate change's impacts, we have to be prepared for the health impacts. Some notable new funding requests in the budget include $13 million for the Developmental Disabilities Division to provide services to the increased number of beneficiaries and also to increase reimbursement to providers to ensure that there's access to services. There's a request for $48 million to request the EMS funds. Those funds were supplanted with ARPA funds. So the end of those ARPA funds, we need to just restore the general funds. And there's a $10 million ask in 2023 and $20 million in 24 for the JAPSOM loan repayment program. We support that program. We just recommend that those funds be appropriated directly to JAPSOM since they'll be one to administer that program. Some other funding sources of interest. The Department of Health has received a workforce infrastructure grant to rebuild the basically public health in the state's national program. It's $14 million over 5 years. Only about $300,000 is actually for like information technology infrastructure. It's mostly for people. There's also the opioid settlement, which is over $70 million over about 17 years. That settlement agreement is very specific about how those funds can be used. The advisory committee includes representation from the counties, Department of Public Safety, Department of Education, and JAPSOM, and working how to best use those funds to mediate the impact of opioid use. As I enter this role, trying to track recent large funding through the CARES Act, as far as ARPA, and understand where there's money at. We're still working on getting a complete understanding of the money received, how much was spent, how much is available, and if any has lapsed. In 2020, it looks that $11 million were lapsed, and trying to better understand what those funds were intended for. So we continue to work to better understand all of our funding requests and use at the department level. In the budget before you, moving on to CIP request, there's a $44 million request for Boonsburg renovations, building on the state hospital. There are many needs, and these funds could be used to stabilize those with substance abuse and a co-occurring mental illness, to stabilize them for a short to moderate duration, non-forensic. There's a need for, again, those who are forensic patients who have long-term care needs, which may have greater resource needs or medical care than their behavioral health needs. So how do we care for them in a setting to address their long-term care needs? So this funding will address other needs than this intended stabilization beds, real short-term stabilization beds, which was the intent of the Oahu region transfer. So that's another request that we need to work on. Other CIP requests are for the state lab to make it a biosafety level 3. As I understand, there's federal funding for that, although we'll likely need an extension and make sure we can get the approval. And there's a separate CIP request for $23 million for state lab repairs and maintenance. Some Department of Health requests that were not included in Governor Ige's budget include 3 human resources positions. They are a force multiplier as we're trying to onboard staff. That's an important investment to be able to, again, help fill some of these vacancies. We also asked for positions for communications office. Keeping the public informed of our activities, particularly with ongoing events, is really important. Communications is also an effective public health intervention. So we'd like to increase our resources and capability to do more effective communications. We also had requested $6 million for additional mental health services for children and adolescents. We recognize there's a need for that population as well. Another ask that was not included was $1 million for the state lab, just for their increased cost for electricity with their new equipment and equipment maintenance. So in summary, those are highlights of the budget request, some of our activities. You're aware of the scope and breadth of what we do, Department of Health. And I'm here with my team to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, members, question?
Yeah.
Karen?
Oh, yeah, I'll defer to you.
Let members ask before the chair.
Okay.
Good, Sharon.
Yeah, you have, on table 11, you mentioned the 750 vacancies, but also in table 6, you're adding the number of new positions. Can you identify why you're adding new positions when you've got a whole slew of vacancies? I mean, it's a major concern.
Yes, ma'am. So as I mentioned, 23 of those positions are actually new positions on the neighbor islands. So the additional requests are for positions different than what are vacant. So there are different locations, different function. So that's for some of the positions.
So can you identify the vacant positions where you don't need them because everything is high priority, and 750, are you able to hire them when you need them, if you need them?
No, thank you for the question. I think we have a responsibility to go through those positions and see are there positions that we no longer need. When I look through the vacancy dates, at least on the vacancy report that I had, there were a couple that were in 2015 that are actually being redescribed for positions that we may need as our workforce evolves. And then it looks like the vacancy dates for other ones are mostly 2020 and more recent.
Well, if you could go over them and give us a listing, because all of these are filled as soon as possible. You're going to have a whole lot of work cut out for you. And where are the high priorities in your department? Because you've got a lot of needs out there waiting for service.
Yes, ma'am, we can do that. No,
Actually, the chair requested all the departments, since the vacancy report is as of November 30th, if you could update them. And I think you'll probably that'll probably be sent to you as a follow-up. And that would be good for you to. There's a report, did we send it out today? No, we don't need it today.
okay.
Yeah, just
We're gonna
as
be
a
looking
follow-up.
for it closer to the time we actually are working on the budget.
Yes.
When it comes to us, that
And
we know what's out there that you haven't filled.
yeah, and just a follow-on sort of to staffing. We've been told that the Hawaii State Hospital is open for business, that it's operating as of April. And you just mentioned that you're not able because you have staffing problems. So again, can we have some specifics on what is the status of the Hawaii State Hospital? Is it open or is it not? And clearly some staffing problems or other problems, and what is open? What is the current status on the number of beds that are there and the number of actual patients in there? And you say you're moving 2 buildings. Where is it all in terms of the state hospital?
Thank you, Senator. We did open the new facility, Aleho'ola, and all of the housing units are open with the exception of 1. So we have 24 beds that are not occupied. Once we moved patients from the lower campus into that facility, we immediately shut those facilities down and commenced anti-ligature work on those units.
Could we have just a report of where you are? So you're moving 2 buildings, you have so many beds. What is the census and where are you and what is your staffing? So that
Okay.
if in fact we can
can
get
get
a
that to
real
you.
clear
Sure,
count of your state hospital.
okay.
Okay, other
Thank you.
questions? Senator Noe?
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for being here as well. My question would be with regards to certification of nurses. And Chair San Buenaventura and I went to the graduation at UH Hilo campus. And there were, or the community college as well, and there were 22 graduates. And we understand that they can't get to work until they're certified, until they get their certification. And they have to go to Honolulu. So having to travel to Honolulu, and then I understand there's a waiting list. So how can we simplify the certification program, perhaps taking it to the neighbor islands? We hear oftentimes we need the services of the nurses. Comes to our attention as well. Hilo Hospital, as an example, and Kona Hospital needs those nurses and aides, but they have to go to Honolulu. And I understand it's a very complicated process. And all they do is sign it and give it back to them. So can we simplify that arrangement?
We are not part of that certification, so we'll go back and talk with DCCA and see what we can do.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
it's not DOH then?
No.
It's DCCA?
Yeah.
Okay, we thought it was, we keep on mentioning it's Department of Health. Okay, thank you. And we'll follow up. I'll follow up with DCCA then, but we thank you for your assistance.
Okay, Senator Favela.
Mental health. Just recently, I learned, for depression, there's a treatment that is not covered under any health care provider in the state. In other states, it's being covered under certain, medical insurance. I found out, that they have this, drug called ketamine. You guys ever heard of this drug?
Yes, sir.
It helps out with depression and people contemplating suicide. The reason why I bring this up is because I got to sit down on a session on my childhood friend attempted suicide 3 times. And this was referred to him by another coworker. But when he went and did all the research and everything to get him done, it's between 800 to 1,000 a treatment. And before that, it's because they need all these provisions, healthcare worker there, and how they're gonna do the IV and the room for the hallucinations and all of that. But after seeing him go through there, the hallucinations that he was going in, reaching to things in the air, emotionally crying and everything. After that treatment, and I seen the difference in him, so did his family. Why is it that with all the research and data I have on this, why are we not contemplating, even now, because of a lot of our family and friends that are going through, all of us in here, sometime or another, go through some kind of breakdown, and then we don't have the resources or even I'm not saying everybody gotta do is $1,000 every month or every week. Some guys go treatment 6 months later, but it's available. And why wouldn't we do? And I always hear everybody saying that mental health is a priority in the state, contemplating and helping with depression and preventing suicide. But then when it comes to this kind of stuff, we as the body, or even in the Department of Health, or even the industry of medicine, why are we not asking the providers or trying to encourage the providers to look into portion of them, maybe the whole thing, helping them? Because then I think that we would have less, even with our teens. I think there's a certain level that they give each time, each dose. But even for our teens, we have the highest teen suicides in the world here on Oahu. I mean, well, in the state. But why are we, as healthcare providers, we're not, Department of Health or anybody in the medical field contemplating and thinking about this? I just found this out in the last 6 months to 8 months, how it works. And the doctor that has the data showed me the data from the mainland and different areas. How can we don't bring that to Hawaii, who has a high rate of suicides and depression?
Let me see if there's any say hi.
If you could identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Dr. Kurt Humphrey. I'm the medical director for the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Division. I am a child psychiatrist. As far as ketamine goes, I think some of the limitations around it are because it's a newer treatment that is the medication has been used primarily for like anesthesia and for other indications, right? And so we're still kind of like learning about how to use it for depression, in what doses, and how it needs to be monitored safely. So at least in children, it's very infrequently kind of used, but it's really cutting edge treatment for depression for like adults right now. And the limitations around it are mostly around safety and monitoring and just how much it costs. But there's a lot of treatments like it, and also psilocybin and other like psychoactive chemicals that have previously been off limits to psychiatrists to use, that are sort of under investigation right now because they do show promise in alleviating depression and other mental illness. So I think it's just so new, so cutting edge. That's probably why we're.
What I'll do is I'll give you the information. It's not new. Maybe it's new to us, always us, less. It's not new. It's not new. I see the data. It's not new. It's been happening in the other states and other countries for a long time. Is this come to Hawaii? It's new. The reason why I'm saying this is because the doctor's willing to give you guys the data. I'll make sure you guys get in touch with them, because it ain't new. And the risk factors, best thing about ketamine, within an hour is out of your system. All these other drugs that the drug administration that give to kids and adults is so dangerous in their system. Kidney damage, brain damage, heart failure, everything. But then we still give them that poison for depression. This ketamine will be in your body for an hour, but it helps you over months at a time. But again, I understand you saying it's new. It's not new, and I'll give you guys the information. But we as a body needs to really think about this. It's the same thing that we're going for when we needed to help our women when it came to breast cancer, right? Oh, the technology for the mammogram is new technology, blah, blah, blah. Now, to get that 3D mammogram, there's one more test before that. And guess what? That test is not covered. How crazy is that be in Hawaii that we have these tests, cutting edge stuff, and we're not giving it to save our people's lives? That's the part that I want to make sure that the Department of Health understands, because that is very important in saving lives. How much people we can help in saving. Thank you, Chair.
Sure, and you should probably share that with the chair so it can be.
Yeah, I was gonna give that. That was something that I was gonna do in my opening speech, but.
Anyone else, and then we'll let.
Can I just go back to the vacancy? You have
ahead.
millions of vacancy, salary savings. Have you used it for other purposes? And if you have, can you give us an itemization of how those funds were used? If they're just sitting there, or are you using it for other purposes?
Well, you can compare some of it to the restriction report that's in there.
Yeah,
And you
okay.
can see some of it was through vacancies, so.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair. My question is regarding Gunsberg. The 44 million, how many beds are we expecting for Gunsberg? I'm assuming these are the buildings at the Kaneohe State Hospital grounds, right? And it's meant to be for stabilization beds, right? That's my understanding. Okay, so Dr. Amy Curtis, please answer. since
Hi,
you're the one
sure.
that's-
No
Yeah.
problem. Thank you for having me here. The beds at Gunsberg were in the design phase. So there was 900,000 that was put this year to look in the design phase. What can be placed in that space, if it can be renovated, if we're talking a new build. So that's going to impact some of the numbers we can look at, but we're looking between 60 and 90 beds, depending on the designs. The other things we're trying to keep in mind that I think are important are the specific uses that will be best utilized for in that longer term stabilization that the director
Okay.
mentioned.
So, but we're back to forensic though. I mean, or is it gonna be for non-forensic users? Because
Yeah, so this is, what we're trying to do right now is mental health reform in our state. We're trying to decrease the amount of folks that are going through the criminal justice system to get mental health. If we're successful in what we're doing, and we're working really closely together with our partners to do that, if we do more jail diversion, if we're able to stabilize individuals sooner, then we're going to have less of those individuals that are defined as forensic. So I just want to make clear that, because that's
No,
a really,
I understand.
Okay,
That's the reason
so-
why I'm asking.
yeah,
Are
so
these
this would
forensic-
be open to a variety of different folks that need that care. What we want to be able to do is help people based on what they need and not based on their legal status, but on what they need from a
Okay,
behavioral
so
health perspective.
we heard from Oahu Regional that
Mhm.
if we're gonna go into forensic, we're gonna need these higher expensive beds, the
Mhm.
non-ligature and all that. And I completely agree with you. We need a lot of non-forensic beds, which is very, especially with 988 implementation.
Yeah.
We need to put some of these people who call 988 into at least some kind of facility, at least stabilize, diagnosis, and then put them into some kind of acute, maybe stabilization beds until we determine where they fit in.
Mhm.
And I'm hearing that you folks have ditched the plan of having Leahi and Maluhia, which the prior administration was thinking of using those empty facilities as stabilization beds. So what's the plan? What's the plan, especially with 988 implementation? How do we do the diversion you're talking about when right now state hospital is only doing forensics? And from what I've heard, not even completely forensics because you folks don't even have enough staff. What's the plan to help those people calling 988, the homeless people, into getting them diverted?
So I'll let others talk about spaces, but I can tell you right now, we've already developed the short-term stabilization, what we call case management-based stabilization beds, licensed crisis residential shelter beds. We
Where?
have those on Oahu. We have them on the Big Island. We're developing them in Maui. We're looking to have them on Kauai. They are currently, you can call the CARES line or 988, and through that mechanism, be diverted into those beds.
Okay,
We're
I
still,
know for instance, like the Big Island, they're full and there are people like camping out outside trying to get in. So
Yeah.
what's the plan on increasing those beds?
So for the Big Island right now, we have put out RFPs and we're working through the contracts to have more of those beds right now, but we could still have there would be additional needs after that still, that we're looking through what spaces could we use, because as you know, there's a big need for those.
And in Oahu too, that's the
in-
reason why we were looking at Maluhia and I'm
Yep.
just wondering,
In
Gunsberg.
Oahu, we also have a budget request in we have container trucks, which will not last forever at our Ekolu stabilization beds on the Hawaii State hospital
That's not
campus.
many.
So we could have, if we have that ask, it's to have additional space there, including for that drop off location could potentially be placed there, which I think
Are
would
you
be.
saying right now with those, that would be enough to satisfy the demand?
If we're able to build out that area and we're able to use through whatever mechanism it is, rent or other one space at Leahi, and we're able to have additional locations on a neighbor island, which is really important because right now there's such a lack, right? Folks may be sent over to Oahu because there's nowhere for them to go, especially in Kauai and others. That would definitely help.
Is it in your budget request for those? Because right now, the reason why we were thinking about having the Maluhia and Leahi being taken over by DOH was because the current system of contracting out isn't sufficient to satisfy the demand. But now you're saying with the contracting, that would be sufficient. You guys, is it in your budget to increase the Palikana program or getting the RFPs out to, like in CARES Hawaii, for instance, on the Big Island? Despite having the contracts, there aren't enough physical beds. So, I mean, what's the plan?
So that's why we did put in those two asks, the one for Gunsberg, which we think will have a big impact, as well as the ask for that area that was traditionally called JPAD, to have more stabilization there, as well as working with whatever space we can get, just as the director mentioned in other areas.
So there, Dr. Fink, is that in the budget to have those increased contracts, or should we have Marion Sujia?
The Goonsburg request was included in Governor Ige's budget. We're working with Governor Green on additional requests for JPAD.
Okay, so that isn't on the budget yet.
That's
or
not in the budget
Or the
yet.
CIP request.
Yes. it
And
is
how
not.
much is that gonna be?
The estimated request was based on a 2015 master plan based on a summer structure, which was estimated 50 million.
That's an additional 50 million that's gonna come down the pipe. Okay, and what about the contracts, like for Cares Hawaii? Hopefully they'll have monies to find beds. I don't know how they're gonna find beds, but, or for the neighbor islands.
Yeah,
Um,
currently we've done that out of our own budget.
So it's part of AMHD's budget.
Mhm.
And that's within that's within your budget request. You'll be able to satisfy like the Pakalana increase in beds that Oahu region says that they're foreseeing as a alternative to the acquisition by Department of Health.
Things have been changing really quickly over the year, because as I mentioned, we had a 37% increase in the census at Hawaii State Hospital in a year and a half. So that's why questions about, do you have enough, make me a little nervous, I'm going to be honest. But we have put in what we think can work, and we're working really hard with DHS to make sure that we can get Medicaid reimbursement whenever possible for these different activities to try to and help with the costs.
Okay. I mean, basically, when you guys come back, I'm gonna hold you folks to that. Because basically, I don't want to hear like Queens Hospital emergency room saying, we don't know what we're gonna do with all these homeless people who we triage and we don't know where to drop them off. And we don't want to see the homeless people being released right out on our streets, right outside our door, right? We want to be able to have these stabilization beds that we can point them to. I have a Candy question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Candy.
Every for purpose of television audience, why don't you explain that?
Oh, sorry. Explain Candy. Child
The Child and Adolescent Mental Health Division.
Okay, thank you. $6 million only. So does that include your the teen suicide prevention programs? No?
So the $6 million was to beef up purchase of service programs, because we implemented a couple of new programs this year that does additional outreach and identification of kids who need community-based services. So we want to make sure that those services are out in the community, and so that's what the 6 million is for.
So that should be enough. I mean, let's face it, CDC has pronounced suicide as a pandemic as of last year. That's the reason we have 988. Are we able to implement suicide prevention?
In checking with the providers, they feel that provided that we true up their costs, they would be able to have the bandwidth to expand.
To do the education and to
Yes.
have the outreach. Okay.
And you know, within behavioral health, we've really been pushing this past year on getting more ahead of it and working more on the prevention side. Our focus has always been on responding to the acute needs, but we can't keep waiting until people are falling off the cliff.
That's right.
We've got to start working with this next generation, and before they get to that acute phase, we've got to start doing better prevention. And as Dr. Fink said before, you know, the work that we do is the stuff that you don't see. I mean, we're really successful when you don't see suicides. We're successful when
That's
we
right.
don't see mental health problems. So we've got to start working on that side.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that that 6 million is enough to implement the education, suicide prevention that we had, I think we passed policy last year. Okay, thank you very much. And last question for water. Ms. O.
Actually, maybe,
No,
actually, once we hold, we're gonna take a 5-minute break so we can swap out the interpreter.
oh, I'm
So
sorry.
this line might actually take a little bit longer than that, so
Oh, the
we're
water
gonna take a
resources.
5-minute break. Go use the restroom or something, but we're gonna swap out the interpreter.
Thank you.
You got a break.
No, should we? All right, so let's resume this informational briefing, and I think Lieutenant Buenaventura has a
Yes,
question.
I just have a few questions. Thank you, Ms. Ho, for coming out now.
Thank you.
Dr. Fink referred to zero budget for Red Hill monitoring. Is that my understanding?
Additional.
Additional monies. So that was my question. Where there is some question from the last briefing by the military on Red Hill and possible implications that the EPA is not doing their job regarding Red Hill. Are you sure we don't need any more additional monies for monitoring, or are we going to rely on the EPA to do the water monitoring?
No, DOH, thank you for that question. DOH is overseeing and enforcing its emergency order. There may be additional monitors. Board of Water Supply has asked for additional monitors. Department of Health will not be paying for those monitors. We will assist in facilitating the Board of Water Supply's request for placement of those monitors. But we will review the data that comes out of those monitors.
Okay, thank you. And cesspool conversions.
And we will ask that the federal government pay for those.
Oh, good.
Oh, so, you know, we've, in the emergency response, we made a request, to the Navy for payment of $1.2 million, which they've reimbursed us for. We've also made additional requests to the Navy, and this is just our oversight costs. We've also made additional requests for approximately, I want to say $230,000, which we're still waiting for reimbursement. So as part of our oversight, we have the ability now to get our costs reimbursed. So we will be actively seeking reimbursement of our personnel costs and other costs.
Okay, and so far the Navy has been good about reimbursing. That's the reason for zero at this time. The increase.
That's, well, I wouldn't say they've been good about it, but I will say that we've been actively pursuing our cost reimbursement.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So cesspool conversions.
Sure.
How are we
Wait,
doing? Oh,
just
sorry.
one follow up on your question.
Go ahead.
Is that money subject to appropriation by Congress, or is that something that they have?
I think the Congress has appropriated them billions of dollars to pay for costs. So I don't know what strings are attached to that. We've been speaking with our congressional delegation about reimbursements. I've been speaking directly with the admirals, Admiral Barnett and Admiral Converse and Admiral Wade, and for any other Secretary of Defense for our cost reimbursement.
Sorry, thanks.
No, that's fine. Okay.
Chair, before you go to the system, I got a question over here. The question that I have is that, are you guys satisfied on the ongoing, cleanup and procedures that's happening? Because there's an urgency, and I know you guys know this already on the health part, but, you know, when I talk to water supply and a constant monitoring of the Department of Health, letting, the communities know. I understand there's no funding and you guys are gonna look into, assisting with monitoring, but I just want to, not only on your guys' side, on everybody's side, on the seriousness of this, health issue. Because if we, just continue to wait for the Navy and wait for this person and wait for everybody, what kind of fines did the state or the department, can we find them? Is there any, accountability besides them reimbursing you of a $1.2 million of spent taxpayers' money for something that they did? You know, I understand we're doing all we can as a state, but the Navy needs to get off their butt and do what's more. Because this is incredibly concerning. Because see, the guys that work for them, when they peel out over here, they can go home, drink their water. We cannot go no place. So the urgency needs to be that they need to be accountable. Every day they should be in a people. Department of Health wants to find them. Cannot because of whatever reasons that they're protected by. But we have to do more for our people because we're suffering. And the contamination that they're with the fire extinguisher. We can never clean that up. EPA. I don't trust EPA. I never did. EPA makes laws and provisions that contaminating my community with Pearl Harbor. So these are the things that I like and we like know from the Department of Health that you guys think you guys doing enough for public, not the Navy, not the EPA, and nobody else. Do you think that the Department of Health is doing as much as they can and should for the people of Hawaii to come to that radio situation? That's the question.
Yeah, actually, I do think we're doing everything we can to protect the people of the state of Hawaii. As you know, when this thing first started in 2021, the Department of Health was out front within a day of this release happening, telling the people not to drink their water, in spite of the fact that the Navy was saying it's okay to drink the water. So in that respect, the Department of Health has been out front in protecting the people. The other thing is we issued our emergency order right away. So we understand the gravity of this. I've always said that I'm 5th generation born in Hawaii. I know what it's like. I mean, you and I have spoken about IAEA and living in that area and being connected to the INA. I know all about protecting our environment. I've done this for 30 some years of my life, and I understand the gravity.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, further question.
Yeah, successful conversion, unless.
No.
Successful conversion.
Haven't.
Thank you.
Is the Department of Health implementing the tax credits, or is that the no tax? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Senior Recruiter, Department of Health, wastewater branch. So that tax credit, income tax credit program actually sunset the end of 2020. I think it was implemented 2015 for, I think it was 5 years. And I know that a bill went in, but it never got passed. However, last year, there was a new law, that actually implements a $5 million grant program. Okay. That requires Department of Health to administer. So, as we mentioned, we're giving testimony, that Department of Health, we didn't actually have like the mechanism to provide grants directly to homeowners. So we've been working actually since July of last year to current. So like we're actually looking at rolling out the grant program like March for cesspool conversions.
Okay, so in the budget, since that's what we're here for, does the implementation of that $5 million grant program, is that in the budget?
That was actually appropriated by the legislature in last year's budget, but then in the law, because we were concerned that because last year was not a 2-year budget, right? In the law, it actually says that one won't lapse until 2024 next year.
Okay. So there is no increase in.
No, there's no increase. Yeah, and I think the purpose was to implement like a pilot,
Mhm.
just so that we can see, like what the issues are, and kind of document like what kind of resources we would need to actually, efficiently, do a grant program. And we're also looking into maybe even partnering with, I think it was the Hawaii Green Infrastructure,
Mhm.
financing, authority, to see how we actually can work with them too, because I know that a law was passed last year for large capacity
Yeah.
cesspools, I think for commercial.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're trying to see like in the future, how can we partner with them? Because they're more of a infrastructure, they're more of a bank, and they have probably mechanisms that's probably more efficient than like having it within the Department of Health, so.
Okay, so since your wastewater branch, Big Island has a problem with their sewer system. Are you folks able to help them fund their sewer infrastructure or?
Which side they're on? Which side they're on?
East Hawaii, right?
Yeah, but that's a county project.
Yeah,
As
was it
I'm
the Hilo?
concerned,
Are you talking about the
It's a
Hilo?
county project. and they-
Yeah, so actually,
It's their Kuleana.
yeah,
Excuse me.
but actually, you talk about the Hilo wastewater treatment plant. We actually are planning on funding that project with our clean water SRF funds.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, we are with the Hilo. So we actually have it in our budget this year because we have like the BIL, the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So we are actually working with them to do that. We actually
To fund which portion?
the Hilo.
No, Hilo, the wastewater treatment plant.
Yep.
They're coming in for me to introduce a bill for $50 million CIP project.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, but we're also doing the design.
Addition then.
Yeah, see, but the design itself was costing, I think, $13 million for that. Yeah.
So this is in addition to that, then it sounds.
Yeah.
But it's a county project.
Yeah.
And to me, they have the opportunity to float their own bonds. And no different that Oahu did Honouliuli's sewage treatment plant. It's a county's funding. If they come for a joint or a additional, that's fine, but I don't believe that. That's my opinion. It's a full, because we have other needs.
I
Thanks.
just wanted to know whether or not the state could help.
We are though,
Okay.
through our low interest loan program, which also provides, it's a principal forgiveness, which is a kind of the form of a grant. So they are our customers. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
That's
don't-
good if you can
Any,
find that.
any
but-
other questions before we?
Yeah,
Close this.
questions for clean water.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I have a letter, more than multiple letters actually, requiring PVT in Nanakuli. Anybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason why I'm bringing this up again, so PVT is, they take everything, Pilau, whatever in the area. They're surrounded by homes, churches, family stores, you name them. Abigail, clinic that's over there already determined the health hazard over there of PVT. So PVT is almost as big as the mountain that is behind them. So when the Department of Health is going to investigate the contaminations around the surrounding properties, including in our streams and our water, because the water goes into our ocean and they already found that there was contamination. Department of Health was doing an investigation. Let me finish because I need to get this out. So they're doing this investigation, PVT would hire attorneys and all that would stop. So I want to know findings you guys found that's killing my family in Nanakuli, that 10 years of their life less, federal, it's documented in the federal mandate about our lives on the Nanakuli landfill area, 10 years less than anybody else that's not living by a landfill. I'd like to know what had happened or what was the procedure of why you guys never come and implemented fines and everything went to on hold when they would hire these high price attorneys to have the cease and desist of you guys continue with you guys findings. So can you guys try to elaborate on that if you guys even went?
Thank you for that question. Joanna Sita with the Environmental Management Division. The PVT landfill investigation by the Clean Water Branch, I will need to go back to them and ask them for the information that you're we're requesting, and I will get back to you on that.
Okay, and then the next time, if you guys ever need one tour, look at them, because my family has the property over there that's contaminating, that's getting sick. They're getting all these kinds of stuff on them, and the clinic is saying it's due to the landfill. And it's documented from the doctors over there. The eczema and everything they have is attributed to opening of that landfill. So I really would want something done or even look into. Appreciate you guys. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Senator. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Kim,
General question. Do you folks handle the Micronesian compact?
No, that that wouldn't be Department of Health. That wouldn't be environmental.
Or human services? The Micronesian compact.
DHS.
DHS does that, okay. So the homes that they have would fall under that, DHS. The families that are visiting and staying in these homes and causing problems in the community.
I guess, yes.
Okay, thank you.
okay, just looking at table 10. What authorization does the department have to do these transfers?
Chair, I'd have to go back and check exactly, but I'm pretty sure that this was kind of a funding issue. So we needed cash. Cash went towards COVID remediation. And so the money was taken out of a budget that had the money, and then we had to replace, and then were made whole later on with FEMA reimbursement.
Okay. Are there any transfers in the fiscal year 23?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Senator Ventura.
So I want to talk about marijuana since I see Keith Ridley here. Is he in charge of your dispensaries program? Somebody here? No, nobody here? I just want to know whether or not it's part of your, could you just identify yourself? Oh, yeah. I've seen you in the dual use. I just want to know whether or not it's part of the budget to see whether or not the potential dual use is taken into account in your budget.
Hi, Michelle Nakata. I am the
Yes.
program manager for the Office of Medical Cannabis Control and Regulation. No, our budget request does not include
Does not
anything
include any of
pertaining
that.
to adult use.
Okay. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay.
I do have a question. Since I see Keith Ridley here, Office of Healthcare Assurance. I know that in the past, we did last year, increase your ceiling. I'm looking at the audit, that you had $546 million as an ending balance. So I'm just wondering, that's from the 2021 report. Do you now still have a balance in your account?
500 million, I wish.
Yeah, it says ending balance 2020, on your special fund.
You're probably talking about thousands of dollars. Is the
Is
OCA
it
special fund?
546,000 or 1,000 then?
Okay,
So I
sorry.
still have, okay.
Yeah.
You
So-
still have that in your,
Let me introduce myself. Keith Ridley, the Chief of the Office of Healthcare Assurance. We have two special funds. One is the OCA Special Fund, which is where we deposit licensing fees and other fines that we collect from illegal operations of care homes. The second special fund is a civil monetary penalty special fund. That fund is from monies collected on citations that we make on behalf of the federal government federal government shares with us some of those monies that come back.
So do you have in your budget completing your whole information system so that we can get reports out into the public in terms of your inspections? Where is that in the timeline for that?
Yes, and that's also in the budget last year, or for this current fiscal year, $710,000 approximately was earmarked for us to complete our management information system project. We're in the process of we're at the front end of reprocuring a vendor to complete that management
What is
project.
the timeline for completion so the public can get the information it needs on your inspections?
Well, the inspection reports are actually already being posted online. I know that there was a bill just.
Your
submitted
reports,
this year.
your results of your inspections are posted online now for all your inspections.
These are for all the relicensing or license renewals inspections that we do for residential care homes as well as long-term care facilities.
And you're fully staffed to do inspections on a regular basis.
We do have some vacancies and we are in the process of recruitment to fill those vacancies. Some of our vacancies are part of a reorganization that we're going to be going through, and those positions will be redescribed. So those positions will likely not be filled anytime very soon.
Okay, thank you. Chair, one more question on
Real quick.
Yep, behavioral health. There was, you're saying that, Marion,
Just
yeah.
ask the question.
Yeah, I've
She
got
can
one
walk
question.
before you guys.
Okay, so, okay, really quickly, Hawaii Cares, that was a real problem with the last administration. And you still carry that program and it's to AUW. Do you have, some report as to their performance evaluation and what they're doing? I know that's the 988, plus you've got counseling in addition to that.
So the Hawaii Cares program is the crisis line that we've had here in Hawaii for over a decade. And 988 was rolled into it because many jurisdictions throughout the country don't have a crisis line. So this forced everybody throughout the country to have a crisis line. So we've been very successful with our transition. We had a vendor previously, and what happened was we also added in the substance abuse piece. So we wanted folks to be able to call and get resources if they had substance abuse needs. Where could they go for treatment? And so we split that from the crisis because it's two different information sets, resources for substance abuse versus crisis care. And so we now have two different providers. The provider that is doing the services for crisis care has just been doing great. That's their area of expertise. They have reduced wait times, dropped calls, and their responsiveness has really been
So you do an
stellar.
evaluation, is it quarterly?
We
or
have
like-
regular weekly meetings and then monthly reviews of the data.
So can you send us a report of their performance on both contracts and what they do?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, adjourn.